We're working within the four corners of the FAR. You heard my good friend Iris Cooper mention earlier, the FAR is actually a pretty flexible instrument. If you use all the authorities that are there, you can accomplish a lot. You just have to know how to use them wisely, and you have to learn to focus on what we can do, not what we can't do. So we bring the team together, and I won't belabor that, it's the integrated product team, to come up with ideas, and we look at those ideas, figure out how we can best execute, and then we help the team execute on that idea. Then we share the learning, the experience, through webinars. We hold bi-weekly webinars where we invite the entire acquisition workforce to participate. We do these webinars on a bi-weekly basis, and the people who lead the webinars are the people who did the innovating. So like I said, we've completed 13 projects. We have about 28 in the works, and we look at things from a procurement standpoint, an entire procurement, or elements of a procurement, or we look at business processes and how we can simplify business processes. The second thing we did with Acquisition Innovations in Motion is said, we've got to do a better job of communicating with industry. But communication is a two-way street. It is more than just us standing up here and telling industry what procurements are coming up and how we're going to do them and when we're going to do them. It is also about understanding what motivates and inspires industry to do business with us. So two events that I host each year. One is the Strategic Industry Conversation, where we come to industry where there are no RFPs, just to have a conversation about what are the things that we're thinking about, what are the problems that we're trying to solve, what are our pain points, and how can industry help us. It's a very high-level discussion. Typically, we have the secretary, the deputy secretary, undersecretaries, and heads of departments there to work with industry and talk to industry through panel discussions about the problems we're trying to solve. The second event, many of you have participated in, hopefully, the Reverse Industry Day. This is where I give industry an opportunity to talk to us, the acquisition community, and help us better understand how we can more effectively engage with you. What are the kinds of information that you need to motivate and inspire industry to do business with us, to invest in doing business with DHS. We host 2 Reverse Industry Day events a year. Generally, our population there it consists of all elements of the department, whether they're cost estimators, engineers, IT specialists, or program managers. Our attendance is upwards of 400, and it's one of the best regarded training events of the year. And it is industry who sits up here and talks to the the acquisition community of the department. Very popular events. Those are 2 events that I host personally to make sure that we make that happen every year and continuously talk to industry. Because our goal is not just to talk to the companies that we do business with, but to also talk to those companies who want to do business with us, the newcomers, the non-traditional companies that normally don't do business with the government. The third thing that we've done is focus on business process improvement. How do we make our business processes easier, more streamlined, and more efficient so that we can invite the program managers, the CIOs, the CFO, et cetera, to be a part of that process. And you cannot improve a business process just looking at it by yourself. You have to bring that CXO community in. We have to understand all the players in the process and how we work better together. And I think that's the single biggest accomplishment that we've made. As a member of this acquisition community, as a member of this CXO suite, I sit on the Acquisition Review Board as a voting member, but more importantly, I participate in the planning activities of not just the programs and the projects that the heads of contracting are working on, but even the activities that our CXO community is involved in to improve their business processes. That, to me, is the single biggest accomplishment that we've made in this department, that you have a CXO community that comes together to help to solve the problems of all the programs that we support. Last but not least, our strategic sourcing program. It is really important to highlight that. When this department was stood up, we immediately and very aggressively pursued a strategic sourcing program. Back in 2004, we stood up our strategic sourcing program. But we've advanced that program to the point that we actually use our strategic sourcing vehicles to support very mission-specific focused needs. We bring components together, 2 or more components, that have a need for a particular product or service. And I'm not talking about the generic stuff like laptops. I'm talking about canines, canine training, training, weapons, trading ammunition, etc. Those very specific mission-focused areas, we are focusing our strategic sourcing program to support that. We are a huge proponent of category management. We are the federal category manager for all things security, and we continue to focus on how we can improve delivering products and services to our customers to meet the very missions that they support. Because at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. It's not just about complying with the FAR. It's not just about small business set-asides. This is about providing real support to real people who serve this mission every day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Stacy to talk about the CFO side.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for inviting us here today. It's an honor to be here, sitting up here with my fellow Acquisition Review Board members. I just actually wanted to highlight a foot stomp what Soraya said and Chip alluded to earlier, is that we have a pretty rigorous Acquisition Review Board process, and our chief line of business community are all members of the Acquisition Review Board, along with the acquisition, I can never remember what PARM stands for.
Program Analysis and Risk Management.
There you go. Thank you. It runs the overall process.
So how the team
we all participate on regular milestone reviews for major acquisition programs, and quite frankly, regular program reviews for acquisition programs for ones that need a little extra attention and oversight. And we all bring our individual disciplines together at the table and talk together when we are reviewing this program. I think that's one of the strengths of the department. It's been in place for a while, but we've gotten extremely better at the integrated approach of us working together under Chip's leadership. So, important role of the CFO as part of the team sport of acquisition management. I'd just like to highlight two things. Obviously, we're in charge of the $70-odd billion of the budget that goes to resource the Homeland Security mission, but there's two aspects of that, one regarding acquisition programs. One is how much is it going to cost, and two, can we afford it? Pretty basic. Boil it down to the CFO's roles and working with the integrated team is we have to understand how much an individual program is going to cost. What are the requirements of the program? What's the time frame to deliver those requirements? What our previous contracting actions resulted in actual costs and for delivery of items? What the federal IT landscape looks like and how we're resourcing those. So we're all coming together to make sure that programs have realistic estimates of what it's going to take to deliver for their acquisitions. I mean, that's probably one of the #1 priorities of the CFO's office. Chip mentioned we actually own the cost analysis division, the cost analysis function. They are a bunch of some of the super smartest folks that I've ever seen. Right? It is a rigorous discipline. They build these mathematical models. They try to brief us on it every now and then. They really take a highly defined technical approach and use industry best practices and contracting plus actual expenditures and help the programs build their cost estimates. Chip mentioned we reached a major milestone. Every single major acquisition program in the department has an approved life cycle cost estimate. That is an estimate of what it's going to take from the beginning of the program through operations and maintenance to deliver, because you can't make a decision to invest in a program up front without understanding the down the stream impacts of how much it's going to take to operate it, and is it more or less than what we're currently operating if it's replacing a system. So that's one, we have to know how much it costs. And building that discipline within the individual components who actually execute and run the programs, the Coast Guards, the Secret Services, the FEMAs of the world that are running those and getting those programs and infrastructure in place to perform the mission. Us working with them directly and building that discipline as part of their culture has been one of the major accomplishments that we've had over the past couple of years. Right? And that's #1 is the cost estimating function and knowing what a program costs. #2 is it affordable? I think, as Chip likes to say, A program manager has never met a requirement he didn't like, right? Didn't want to build to. Everybody wants to build, the Cadillac to support the mission of Homeland Security, but you actually have to think about, as you're setting your program baseline for executing, am I going to be able to deliver with the funds that are going to be available? And that integration with the budget process is the second most important thing that a program manager and the acquisition process has to be able to consider, is linking those together. We now have established an annual affordability review for every major acquisition program. Components have documented their processes. It's part of our 5-year resource planning look on what the components provide to the department as their resource plan. I mean, it's just not realistic for a component for a program manager to plan on delivering something in 2 years that you don't have the funding for, except over 5 years. I mean, it makes your schedule unrealistic, and it makes expectations for delivery unrealistic. So bringing the CFOs into the conversation up front on what does my budget planning process look like, and what am I, from my top line expenditures, going to be able to say, here's what I've set aside to be able to do this. The affordability memo is a key part of every single program review, that we have the CFOs and the components, the CFOs over those programs sitting there at the table saying, I have reviewed all of my resources, and here's what I expect to be able to fund for the entire component. So those 2 areas, how much it costs, and is it affordable, links in directly, and it has very strong partnerships with the other lines of business up here at the table. Better resourcing decisions leads to better acquisitions overall. And with that, I will turn it over to my partner, Rich Sterpoli.
Thank you, fantastic. I have to say, I love the title of this morning's event, Acquisition is a Team Sport. As such, I'm going to try to use as many sporting analogies as I possibly can. However, I'm not at a loss to find something funny about German soccer. I don't really know what you say about that. But in keeping with that theme, I will say that speaking to Soraya Correa about procurement and acquisition is like talking to Joe DiMaggio about hitting. You will not find anyone more well-versed in that arena, and certainly an important person in my world, because as I approach my 50s, I'd really like to stay out of prison. So this is very important. For the last 8 years, I worked at a company called the Fortress Investment Group, which is a New York-based international hedge fund. And to say that something is based in New York, I think implies that we move at a fast pace. When you talk about a hedge fund in New York, you can imagine the pace at which we moved. Most people there will spend a year and a half, maybe 2 years before they move on to another place of employment. I stayed for 8 years. I really enjoy that kind of pace. I really enjoy getting into the weeds and the minutiae of solving problems, addressing an issue, and then moving on to the next issue, and having people say, wow, how did you do that? Well, you do that by building upon things that are common business sense applications. You do that by building on things that work, applying them, and then moving on to the next project. So one of the things I do in the realm of IT as the CIO at Homeland, we've got 22 agencies, component agencies under us, is we will no longer try to go after the 100% solution. Because if you go after the 100% solution in the environment in which I work, and the diversity of things that we deal with, on one end of the spectrum, we may have a very small yet very important component like the OIG, which basically does investigations. The other end of the spectrum, you've got something like the Coast Guard. You may have some Coast Guard commander on a Coast Guard icebreaker up in the polar ice cap. To try to find a solution that fits all of those things, you'll never get moving. So what we try to do is we look for the 80% solution. What fits the best that gives us the biggest impact for 80% of the people? And then through conversation, and I mean conversation, and I'll get to that in a minute, we will move things along. And then we'll come back and we'll fill in and we'll deal with the remaining 20%. Now when I first came over here, I had an opportunity to sit down with the undersecretary. And one of the things he was genuinely surprised at, I don't even have to look at him, and I know he's going to look surprised when I say this, is as a CIO, I'm not really a big proponent of using email and text messaging. I think those are probably the two most overutilized things, along with PowerPoint, that I've ever encountered, not just in the government, but in the whole world. So I'm a big believer in face-to-face conversation, old school, pick up the phone and get something done. So the level of engagement that I think I bring to the table that maybe I've reinstituted in the CIO world, and hopefully throughout DHS and then throughout the federal government, is engagement. You've got to stay engaged with the CFO community as well as procurement, the CPO community, and then ultimately, with the boss, because everyone has to report to someone. So one of the things I've started to do is I've taken the CFO community, the CPO community, and a few others out on field trips, right? These are the people that are paying a lot of money for some big ticket items, yet often they don't know what they're buying. All they know is what they see in a contract or on some procurement or acquisition form. Hey, this is a project we're looking to develop. So I spend a lot of time dropping in on these folks saying, come on, we're going to go out. We just came back from the data centers, which are way out in the hinterlands of Virginia, but we've talked about this for years. Billions of dollars is being spent, but if you talk to the CFO community, none of them have ever been down there to see it. Well, we've changed that. Likewise, we just got back from a trip to Mount Weather. Super secret, highly classified project. You've got to get people out and involved. They need to see what they're buying. If anything's going to get people into trouble, it's going to be a misstep in the CFO world, or certainly in the contracting and procurement aspect. One of the other things I like to do is I have an old school whiteboard in my shop. And what I do is when I meet with industry, and Soraya put it perfectly, I cannot undervalue the utility of engaging with industry enough, and it's got to be an ongoing two-way street. So I continually invite representatives from industry to come up to the shop to see what's going on, to listen to what's going on. It is so vitally important. That H in Homeland doesn't just affect the 22 components and the 400,000 employees, but it affects 350 million Americans. I don't care what your political leanings are, even though I'm a political appointee. At the end of the day, you talk about a team sport. I can't think of any greater team sport than securing the homeland. It affects every one of us. If something blows up, figuratively or literally, every one of us is affected. So whether you work for Dell or HP or Oracle, doesn't matter. Every one of you has a stake in this game, and I welcome all of your help, and likewise, I will do the same. The drapes have been opened, the kimono has been opened, if you will. I have no secrets. Whatever we need to sit and talk about, we will, and then we'll go see Stacy and Soraya and figure out how do we make it from point A to point B to actually resolving something. I like to keep the contracts and the contractual process as simple as possible. If you come up to my office, you'll see my whiteboard. At one end of the whiteboard, hey, here's my issue that I've got to solve. At the other end of the problem is what I'm looking for in resolution. Somewhere in between that are these two ladies. We've got to get in there and keep it as simple as possible. And more importantly, if things aren't working out the way we thought they were going to work out, it's through that ongoing dialogue and those pre-existing relationships that we may be able to pivot and take a turn and maybe alter a contract or kill a project completely and move on to something else. Even though DHS has 22 components and tremendous amounts of resources, I find that sometimes isn't even enough. So I've expanded that. Just last week I've had some meetings with representatives from the Department of Education and from HUD. There are 300 agencies in the federal government. Some agencies, some of you probably never even engage with. But I put a stop to that. We will engage with all the federal agencies. There are some agencies out there doing some fantastic things. It seems to me it's incumbent upon me to find these people, bring them into the fold, find out what they're doing and how they got to that point. Let's plug them in with the right people and apply that to the department, and then get that rolled out government-wide. Just a little bit of philosophy about that. In keeping with the sports analogy, if you do nothing else tonight, go home and rent a movie called Miracle. It's my favorite movie. It's not a religious movie, right? No issue there. And it's not even really a hockey movie, but it's a movie about the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. Everyone has a mentor. I was 12 years old in 1980. You can kind of do the math. Yeah, I'm getting to be 50. But it's more of a character study about a coach, done in her books. And if you watch this movie, and I love this movie, and no matter how many times I've seen this movie, we always win. So what's wrong with that? What a great way to start the day, right? But there's a line in this movie where Coach Brooks goes out and he reminds his team that when you pull on that jersey, you represent yourself and your teammates. And the name on the front is a hell of a lot more important than the name on the back. And I mention that because I really don't care who you work for, whether it's an agency or some private sector. If you can come into my shop and you can help me solve a problem and secure the home loan, then that's exactly what I'm looking for. And together we can all accomplish that. So, having said that, sir, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. He doesn't even have a smart board, by the way.
I can't work. She's sitting right beside it. I told you didn't have them. I had to go to Home Depot, get a piece of slate and some chalk. That's okay.
Yeah. He doesn't know how to use one.
Yeah.
So at this point, are there any questions for these guys? Any questions at all?
Back there.
There's back one over here, Chip to the...
Yes, I see you back there.
Hi, my name is Andy Weaver with Management Concepts. You mentioned about cost, and my curiosity is how do you make sure that the costs are accurate? Because in my experience with the government, with the federal government, sometimes the cost estimates don't, in reality, are not the same.
One of the ways that we actually do, and we've started to grow this function a little bit more robustly, is do independent cost assessments of the program's life cycle estimates. I mean, they all are approved by the department in some form or another using specific criteria, but when you really dig down into the weeds of what the assumptions are that the estimates are based on, you start seeing that there's levels of uncertainty around different areas and different assumptions, and that is what actually the cost analysis division is bringing to the table when we start looking at approving the programs going forward, is what are the assumptions and what are the level of uncertainties associated with those assumptions. And actually, one success story is we had a component program go back and adjust their estimate and their schedule based on what we had pointed out to them on the uncertainties of the discussion. So there's a rigor behind being able to, we haven't done it on 100% of them, but some of the larger programs, you're exactly right. But there's an evaluation process that we do and share best practices on estimating and try to build that as more of a robust discipline throughout the department.
I'd say the other thing we do is, or we're in the process of doing, is getting data. So our cost function doesn't have a whole lot of data to work with, and they need a lot of data, and it needs to be in a consistent format. You know, Rich was talking about we got 22 agencies that were cobbled together, so an apple is not an apple is not an apple. So as a part of our financial systems modernization, a key component of that is actually developing a common account structure so that an apple is an apple is an apple, in addition to a simplified appropriation structure. So then they can use business intelligence to suck that information out and use it to develop better cost estimates. I'm sorry, Shariah.
Yeah, I was just going to add, the other thing that we've done is not only brought rigor to the discipline, but brought in the right people to do this. In other words, hiring real cost estimators as well as developing our own. Allow me to introduce one of our acquisition professional career program participants, Ala Shayab. Could you stand up and just wave everybody? He's in his second year. He's one of our up-and-coming cost estimators. So we're not only hiring the right folks, but we're also training our folks so that we're building it from the ground up. And then the last piece of that is that all-important market research piece. When we're buying commodities and services, we know a lot about the industry that's out there. There are a ton of tools out there that we can use to help us estimate and get to more accurate estimates. So we're really trying to bring the rigor and the discipline together through our respective communities.
Yeah, we've got to build that community out throughout the components. I mean, one of the things Shariah has done through the Homeland Security Acquisition Institute is build a more robust cost estimating education and training program through that particular apparatus. But we clearly need to do more in the components to build that capability out, and we're in the process of doing it. Yes, sir.
Richard Michelle. I want to give a shout out to the institutional courage and transparency that you demonstrated for the last contract.
Thank you.
And I want to suggest that anyone who says that that means that we shouldn't innovate is a nincompoop, in my personal opinion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate that.
But what is your takeaway from that?
So I'm not going to get into a detailed discussion of lessons learned because I actually have a team back there that's really working on that, and I want to give them an opportunity to really speak. They worked very hard on this procurement, and I'm very proud of the work that they did. There were some mistakes, there were some missteps, and certainly we're going to learn from them. And a couple of things that I will share with you that we learned is that sometimes we need to expand on our training a little bit. I'll say this, and Chip recognizes what I'm saying. We had an agile process for doing the solicitation and the evaluation, but we fell back to a waterfall documentation process, which caused us some problems. So those are what I would call the high-level lessons learned, but I really want to give our team an opportunity to put together their report because they're doing a detailed report for me. And then I will come out and I'm also going to meet with industry and get feedback from them because the industry was a vital part of this. I just want to remind everyone, Flash was an experiment through the Procurement Innovation Lab, and so as happens in experiments, some things go well and some things don't. The last thing that I will say is I own it, I lived it, it is my project, it is my failure. But thank you for your kind words, Rich.
So let me just add to that.
Good boss.
Yeah, she didn't own it by herself.
That's right.
I own it right there with her. And first of all, I'm very proud of the work they did. You know, Soraya, it would be very easy in the procurement community in particular to just sit back, get in your little cube, and just do business as usual. Soraya every day encourages her folks to put their toe on the line, never go over the line, but put their toe on the line and continue to push it out each and every day. So the innovation that went on in that solicitation should never be lost. We need to build on that and continue to do that. As she said, there were some things we did that we could have done better. We were very agile in how we approached the procurement itself. We were very traditional in how we approached the back end and the documentation and some other things, which we'll learn from. But Soraya and I had a webinar about, it's funny, we had a webinar about a month ago, a peer webinar on this very subject about innovation and failure. And figuring out ways to, and this is going to sound, people are going to write this down and go, what? He said what? But figuring out ways to encourage innovation and reward innovative failure. Not rewarding poor performance, but rewarding innovation and innovative failure. Because we don't learn a darn thing by success, really. You don't learn anything through success. The most successful people on the planet learn through failure. And they learn through a lot of failure. And as long as you're learning through it, we need to figure out ways in the federal government to reward that innovation and actually reward the folks who really took risks, took a chance, and didn't get it completely right, but learned from it, and then they'll move forward and make us even better in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions for us? Yes, sir. Yep.
Quick question on enterprise solutions and funding. We've heard a lot of teamwork and two big departments with a lot of components. And it's always contentious when it's, well, how much is my share? And how do you confront enterprise cost allocation, because you have cost estimating? How do you divvy up the costs? And how do you come to equitable solutions for who pays what?
So I'll start and I'll let Stace. We divvy up the cost by the slowest guy gets most of it. The one we can catch. I guess I'd start back with that joint requirements function where we're really trying to get after joint solution, enterprise solutions. It's interesting, you know, we've had about 100 requirements now go through the joint requirements process. 100 of them were brought in as standalone, single component efforts. 2/3 of them came out as multi-component efforts. So I think we're getting at it. As far as the cost allocation goes, what I try to get folks to step back and say is, it's all the Secretary's money. At the end of the day, it's all his money. How we allocate it or how he allocates it to you, don't worry so much about it. Everybody's going to get their share, but it's about the greater good of paying for the capability. And you get to pay some and you get to pay some. And that's what she gets paid to do, to figure out how to allocate that. But I'm really encouraged by what's going on in the requirements process and figuring out those multi-component solutions. Now, what we haven't figured out is once they get in and become a acquisition is how to run those programs. You know, we haven't figured out how to run joint programs in this department, whether we do executive agents or whether management, if they can't run fast enough, they get them, which would be me, and I will keep running as fast as I can because I don't think we should be the ones running programs, in particular since we're the ones providing oversight of programs. But we're going to have to figure that out as these programs mature, is how we're going to pin the tail on the donkey, so to speak, in terms of what component or components are going to run those programs. I don't know, you guys want to say anything else?
So I think that what I would add to Chip's remarks are we have a very full and open and transparent resource allocation process where the department's leadership comes together as a leadership team, the Deputies Management Action Group, and reviews the resource requirements of the department, including some of those joint programs. And when, as a department, we see the value and the importance of a particular requirement, we put the dollars, like Chip said, it's all the secretary's money. He gets the final decision, but the transparent leadership group makes the recommendations to the secretary to what to finance. And we plan things out ahead of time by virtue of having our 5-year resource plan in place.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I'd say real quick is, you know, we're blessed in this department to have a secretary who understands joint.
Yes.
You know, he came from that environment. We're also blessed to have a deputy secretary who understands how, one, the department works, but two, understands acquisition, understands the complexities of acquisition, and understands the need for jointness that she saw when she was here before. So we've definitely got the right leadership in place to help us continue to make progress.
Hey, Chip, I think it is important to add that within management, the other thing that we have is each one of us has councils that are made of the lines of business, the heads of the lines of business. So I have an HCA council, Stacy has a CFO council, Rich has a CIO council, and so on. These councils not only meet individually, but we come together periodically to share information and to try to help each other out, especially when we're working through these kinds of issues like resource allocation for programs, so that we're communicating not only up and down, but across the spectrum. So it is really important to understand that it's not just in the CFO shop, it's working across the entire lines of business.
Yeah, we've really done some tremendous work between the CFO and the CIO council in particular so that those folks understand what his requirements are and how we can better resource them. So we bring those folks together quite a bit. Any other questions for us? Going once? Going twice? All right, thank you very much. All of you.
Thank you. Good job.
So how about that, guys? How about another hand? So those are pretty inspiring stories, to me at least. And I have to express my appreciation to both Soraya and Iris for volunteering to bring their teams here and to share those stories with all of us, because I think there's a lot to learn there and a lot to imitate and a lot to take back to wherever you're going. So great stuff. So instead of me trying to cap that conversation, which I know there are many who can do it better, and I found one, and she's sitting up front. Her name is Melissa Storinsky. She spent a career in the government, mainly at HHS, VA. She was the director of FAI, and she's back at CMS now for the second time, and she's the head of contracting at CMS. Tremendous experience, and she's going to try to summarize everything that you just heard in a few minutes, and good luck, Melissa.
Thanks, Tim. And for those of you that know me, his remarks about summarizing in a couple of minutes, you know that's going to be really hard for me to do because I'm very passionate about this work. Our two panels that were up here this morning, it's really hard to follow that, to top that, but I'll do my best to summarize what I think I heard. But before I do that, I did want to just comment, carrying on with the theme of acquisition being a team sport. I think at the end of the day, we all want a good game, right? Can I see a show of hands? How many from industry in the audience? Okay, and then how many from government? Okay, it looks about 50-50. So again, at the end of the day, I think we all want a good game when we think about sporting events that we go to. Of course, there's going to be winners and losers, but at the end of the game, we want good performance. We want the teams to put everything out there and really give us good performance. And as long as the game was fair and people knew what to expect throughout the game, I think at the end of the day, we want that good game. So to summarize what I think I heard both of the panels talk about, I would start off by saying, at the end of the day, all of this is about leadership. I think we've had legislation over the years, the Services Acquisition Reform Act, FITARA, most recently the Program Management Improvement Accountability Act, trying to bring a lot of discipline, I think, to the government so that we can buy smarter across the board. And without strong leadership, the legislation, I don't see the legislation as being successful, and I think our panelists really exemplified what that good, strong leadership looks like. And they're modeling behavior that the rest of the workforce is going to follow, and so really great success stories by our panelists up here this morning. I will also say that they really have demonstrated their commitment and willingness to take on some of those big, really tough problems. Oftentimes it's easier to stay status quo and not deal with those big, systematic, bureaucratic issues, and they really have shown strong commitment to take those things on. I also heard, and I've been a big believer of this over the years, that technology and the acquisition solutions are the easy part. And many of our panelists talked about the cultural change that's required, and having that leadership to drive some of that cultural change that is needed is absolutely critical. We heard about unity of effort. I think Sunny, talked about that several times. Really important to get that C-suite across the top aligned and committed to taking on those big, tough problems and staying unified when the tough gets going. Sticking together when things don't always go as planned. We also heard in the Treasury example, I think the pre-award that's the easy part. The rubber really hits the road post-award. And how do we really ensure, we have a tendency, I think, to put all of our energy and effort into that pre-award process, and then post-award, we lose the discipline to stay the course and make sure that we're staying unified as we move forward. Sunny also talked about that integrated governance. I can't agree with that more. And I think we have opportunity all across government to do a better job of that integrated governance. It brings visibility to where those opportunities are. It brings accountability to the health of those programs. And so I think that's another aspect that's really critical. The second thing that I observed from the panels, there really was a lot of trust amongst the entire team. Not blaming or not shirking responsibility. There was unified ownership and trust in each other, trust in the system, trust in the process. And so I think that's another critical piece that we can't lose sight of. Flipping my notes here. Another theme that I heard is we're all in the game together, and we heard Chip and others talk about the importance of industry. Industry is absolutely a critical player in the game, and so we can't underestimate that at all. Another thing, no one player, we all know this, right, in the sporting world, that no one player can win the game alone. It really takes an entire team. I coached a lot of youth sports over the years, and it always fascinated me, the lessons I learned from these kids on the field and how it played out in the professional work environment as well. It really does take a team to be successful, and we can't rely on one player alone. Also heard elements and themes of the blame game. I think we have a tendency to blame each other. A good coach at the end of the game is not going to blame his players. So we heard Soraya say she owns it, and we need that leadership at the top that is going to support the players when things go well and when things don't go well, and we need to learn from the mistakes that we've made. We've got to stop blaming each other. We're seeing a lot of finger pointing going on, in our world, in our business, and we need leaders that are going to bring the team together and own it together, because if one person fails, we all fail. Setting and managing expectations, we heard elements of that. Really, really important. I don't think we can communicate enough. And so we need to make sure pre-award, post-award throughout that we are communicating and being very clear on roles and responsibilities, lines of demarcation between each. And I do think we need to empower agility. We heard a little bit of that. Again, going back to the sporting analogy, while it's clear coaching some of these kids over the years, you had offensive players, you had defensive players, but if you had a good defensive player that made a fantastic defensive play, and he or she saw an opportunity to go on the offense, to go on the attack, to score a goal, you wanted your players knowing that you had their back if they were going to try to do that. And so that agility, almost that instinctive nature to be able to take advantage, seize that opportunity. And so we need to find a way in our professional environment to give our staff and empower that agility that we want you seizing those opportunities when they present themselves. We heard, and I was pleased to hear Sunny talked a lot about the program management structure and the discipline. I'm hopeful for PMIAA that's really going to bring, particularly on the civilian agency side of the house, that it's going to bring the rigor and the discipline. So this is about, I think, the success stories that we heard, largely leadership, but also equally important is the discipline of strong, good program management, not just pre-award, but throughout the life of that acquisition. Another piece, too, I think the doctrine. We heard Soraya and the DHS folks talk about the Acquisition Review Board, that governance, regular assessment of the health of the program so that can inform future investment decisions. Good program management is going to bring to light all of those elements. And then finally, we heard pieces of managing risk. And I think relative to that and the leadership theme, we as leaders have to provide that top cover to our staff. We don't want our staff becoming stagnant. We don't want our staff continuing to do things just because we've always done things that way. And so we have to create a culture that encourages wise risk-taking and then provide the top cover for our staff if they step out, cross that line, and things don't go well. I always tell staff, as long as nobody dies or nobody goes to jail, we can fix a lot of things. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive for excellent performance the first time. That's always our goal. But sometimes we get so wrapped around the axle, and we're what-ifing, and and we're trying to insulate ourselves from every single possible risk that might exist out there. And we cannot do that. It's cost prohibitive to insulate ourselves from every single risk that's out there. So we as leaders have to create that climate, that culture that encourages that wise risk-taking. We heard Soraya talk about business process improvement. I'm a big believer, and this is why I love actually being back into operations, around business process improvement, figuring out what are we doing, why are we doing some of the things that we're doing? Can we relax some of the higher level reviews that perhaps are not adding value to the entire process? So helping staff figure out where those opportunities lie and then providing the leadership direction and top cover to relax some of those things. We heard Richard talk about going for the 80% solution. That's all about, in my opinion, managing risk. We're never going to be able to get to 100%, so let's really try to prioritize the things that are most important to us and focus our resources there. So those are the high-level summary of I think, to distill everything that we heard in 5 buckets, if you will. And before I depart, I did want to leave you with a short little video. It's about 3 minutes. That I hope will be inspirational to you about just how hard it is, you know, and not just on the government side, but you as our industry partners. This is really, really hard work. And we can choose to stagnate. We can choose to be status quo, because sometimes that's easier than taking on the really hard, tough problems. But if we do that, we're never going to be delivering that really good game for the American taxpayers that are counting on us. So with that, I don't know how to get the video going. Can our guys in the back get the video? Here we go. I hope you guys can hear it.
What's going on, Mr. Voss?
Biology, Derek. Can someone tell me what happens when a cell stagnates? Okay, no one's listening to me. I will try again. Anyone know what happens to a stagnant cell? I don't know, something about cells. Maria.
It's not good.
Did you hear that? It ain't good. People, a cell that is not in motion is not a productive member of the system. It ends up assuming all the other cells are going to pick up the slack somewhere, but they don't. In fact, they imitate the stray cell until basically the whole organism begins to die. Yeah, but you know what? Biology is an amazing thing. And here's the good news. All that decays can be restored. This isn't anybody.
Like how a cut heals.
Like how a cut heals. Brian, my man.
You got one.
And once that cell is back on track, it creates energy amongst the other cells. That's what happens. It starts getting a little movement going. It gets a little rumble. Can I get a little rumble from everybody? Everybody just rumble in your seats right now for me. Just rumble a little bit. Okay, no rumble. That's fine. I'll be the low rumbler up here. That's what I am. I'm a low rumbler. But then the cells start banging into the other cells. And the cells push back and go, hey, what are you doing to me? They hit into another one. Hey, don't do that to me. That's my friend. You don't even know him. You don't know me either. I know you, we work together because then they hit a rhythm. They all hit a rhythm, and this is the beginning of the restorative process. So now, even if the entire system is close to dead, what happens? Martinez, come on, give me some. Not today. Oh no, not in my house. No. Yeah, here we come. Don't look at my pant leg, Derek. You're better than that. Right over you. Come on, man. What do you say? If all cells work together, what will happen?
The entire system is healed.
Exactly.
So that's the gist of it. So go off, play the game well, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning.
Okay, well, I can't do that dance. And I'm not going to try, but it's been a fabulous morning, and it's time to stretch our legs a little bit. So before you do that, I just want to make sure you know what's going to happen next. So we're going to have 4 sessions now, one from each of the 4 tracks. One is on cloud, one is on putting the team in acquisition, the other's on FATARA, and finally the services acquisition workshops. So pick your session, enjoy your session. Don't forget to download the app. If you haven't downloaded the app, you can know who else is here and what they're thinking if they're sharing. And And then for the lunch agenda, the first thing we'll do is have the Chief Acquisition Officer's Awards presentation during lunch, and then we'll have a keynote speech from Mr. Victor Gavin from the Navy. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for C4I, and a few other things too. So enjoy the session, and we'll see you on the other side.